Peter, you have been watching all day. What do you think?
By the way, I want to point out that we're doing an interesting experiment here. We are now simulcasting with your show and with Quarantine, which is a show that you've been on that's been looking at innovation throughout the era of this moment that we've been in. And Mickey McManus, my co-host, and Jane Metcalf are over there. And I believe we'll all be together in a moment to wrap things up today as Omid works his magic with these virtual tools. One of the things that struck me about today, and you actually began the day this way, is there's this, we're a moment of both crisis and possibility, right? And we're talking about entering this biological century where we have control over so many things. And you began the day talking about that, and there were some very positive moments. For example, when Poppy and Jane were talking, Poppy found kind of really interesting silver linings in how our species was evolving. Kids were learning out how to use Zoom, how we were kind of advancing with technologies kind of faster than perhaps older people, a very plastic moment. Tell me, as you constructed today, what were the major themes you wanted to hit, and what do you think some of the key lessons have been?
Well, for me, what I wanted to do with today was that I wanted to make sure, like, what my intentionality was with this is that I kind of set it up at the beginning where, I wanted to answer, or the curation for this really came out of me asking myself the question, what would it take for this period of time, this sort of like devastating, as Jason Maiden said, it's for the first time in human history, we have such a collective trauma that we can all see and know about. Like previous pandemics, people in other parts of the world might not have known about it. It wasn't happening simultaneously, but it's actually happening completely simultaneously, and we all sort of know about it. And so, in the shadow of that, I was like, what would it take for that? What would it take for that shared experience to actually be the beginning of decades of abundance and health and human happiness? And that's where, these 12 areas came out that the talks roughly fit within. And so what I wanted from today and tomorrow is for people to get a sense of how much possibility there was, how many vectors, unexplored, unconsidered vectors, where we actually have a great deal of power and ability to create the things that we really need. And so I'm thrilled. It's every talk is I think pushing into that. And we have Mickey and Jane ready to come on.
Hey, Nichol, I have another question for you. This today's show. Well, hey guys, welcome.
Hi.
We have accomplished a feat by connecting two different shows together, and thanks for everyone with technology. I was going to ask you this. So you, of course, put this show together during the pandemic, and what went on today reflected a lot of research and updated thinking that people were developing over the last several months. And I'm wondering, and you've, of course, been putting on this transformational tech conference for a few years. How has the vector of what...
This is the 6th year.
Huh? 6.
This is the 6th year.
So here's my question. How has the universe been, or how have you seen the nature of what people are working on get changed, moved, motivated by this shared experience that we've been through for the last 9 months?
Yeah, Dr. Ghaffari said it earlier today. Like, one of the things was, in the very beginning, when I first started this, and Jeffrey Martin is my co-founder with Transformative Tech. When we first started, there was a lot of single signal. There was a lot of single signal where there was just like one signal. Now, pretty much everyone is doing multi-signal, or if they're doing single signal, then there is a contextual program that they're also picking up, like something, it's integrated into a coaching program. I would say, there was a period of time where we were all really focused on measurement. And now, everyone is, focused on like, what are the interventions now that we know that we can measure it? So you're seeing multi-signal, you're seeing humans in the loop. We're seeing, that acceleration of machine learning. There are, some tough, hairy problems that have to get solved. that I think will sort of unlock, a compounding of progress. And so those are things like, the reason why I love the Epicor biosystems is like the lab on a patch at the very beginning of, ultimately starting to measure things like cortisol eventually. It's like, and having millions of data points out there versus, just a few and them all being, things that, that are cordoned off. So we're going to see, we'll see the proliferation of data that allows for more insight. So a big breakthrough is, something like that, getting lab test, on a sticker. Another thing are things like, Mary Lou Jepson's work and also Brian Johnson's work of, basically getting past the logjam of fMRI machines and how that is actually slowing medical and psychological understanding and progress because they're very expensive. There's not that many of them and everybody has to wait their turn. And so, that sort of thing. Also, another thing is, having more federated machine learning. And so that was one of the things that Moxie is doing. And, there's several other places where the critical personal private data doesn't actually leave the collection point that the person owns, with them being, as Mike Edelhart said today, the point of collection, but the math leaves, and just the math.
So one of the
algorithms.
One of the points that Jane made a moment ago is that the pandemic has created a global set of a moment of collaboration and a kind of global eyes on things and working together, which seems like an extraordinary moment for science. And Jane, I'd love you to just amplify that because it's both a hopeful thing, but it suggests a way that we're all working a problem very differently.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody saw this as a threat to the entire world, and people came together across interests, right? Across national boundaries, across corporate boundaries. There's this extraordinary sharing of data that, normally a scientist is all about the data that she collects and the information that she can, derive from that. And that's what her funding depends on. And so to see people just willingly sharing their data in the interests of something bigger than, their own careers or sharing their data, of course, could advance their careers, but perhaps not in the same way that has happened in the past. So, the sharing of data, sharing of IP, I think we've reached a point of maximum, human collaboration. I don't know that there's ever been a time when we have collaborated so openly and honestly and quickly, in the interests of something that's bigger than any of our individual lives or companies or institutions or governments. And I'm enormously heartened by that. I'm very excited. I think it bodes well for the future of our neobiological revolution.
One of the
Jane, I wanted to catch everyone up just before we jumped over to this stream in the quarantine stream. Jane, you were talking about just sort of this has to be a global movement. We have to get a lot more people to understand this because it shouldn't be that it's like all the cool biological startups are Boston or San Francisco. It should be Austin and Pittsburgh and Texas and Tokyo and Abu Dhabi and Mumbai. And, it should be really, let's get everybody, let's get all brains on deck for this because it really has to do with the future of humanity. I'm curious what you think is going to help us get there, Jane, on your side. And then Nichol, what's the arc been in terms of when you first started 6 years ago to now in terms of global, like the people you're pulling in, the conversations you're having, how has that changed over 6 years?
Okay, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is that, scientists coming together to try and hammer out the proper way of pursuing the research has been so eye-opening. I mean, we saw at the second international conference on human genome editing, we saw He Jiankui come out with this extraordinary announcement that he had, human engineered these two babies and using CRISPR. And, the world's reaction could have been, maybe it was a trial balloon. Let's see what the world will say about this. And I think we saw the responses. And I think what we have seen when those conversations take place among an international community of scientists is that, these responses are very cultural. They're very pegged to a particular culture and a particular geography and a particular time. And we saw this when American scientists were talking about, just because a baby has a risk of being born deaf doesn't mean that we would automatically assume or agree that genetically engineering that embryo would be an acceptable choice. And in fact, a scientist was explaining to an international audience that, deaf parents would welcome another deaf child into their community. And of course, we all know they have this incredible, rich and beautiful way of communicating with each other, which is sign language. I think the Chinese scientists were appalled. To them, a deaf embryo is a non-viable fetus. And so I think it's really important that these conversations be taking place now, because the first and most important thing we can do is understand what those differences are and how they differ from India to China to Tanzania to, Colombia. And I think the global community of biomakers, people that are running like your bioeducational maker lab, is very global. And, they are literally in, there's like 3 or 4 in Amsterdam, but, they're in Shenzhen and they're in Timbuktu. I mean, they are not dependent on big government, big hospital, or big academic institutions. The stuff is available in scientific publications and YouTube videos. So I think we're going to see a really interesting time over the course of the next 5 years as we come to grips with how each of these communities is going to respond differently to these tools and these possibilities.
This kind of reminds me of what Nichol, earlier today you had Gallup, and they were talking about how a ladder, 0, you're not feeling well-being, 10, you're feeling a lot of well-being, for their global polls on happiness and well-being, wasn't actually culturally appropriate in some places. Like, what does it mean if I'm at the top of the ladder? Does that mean I fall off? What is it? What about just my community? And so the new one that they were talking about today was about kind of introducing new measures that have to do with more cultural relevance, about community and knitting things together, and not assuming even just a ladder is culturally the same everywhere in the world. And I just love that. Nichol, what have you seen in the evolution of sort of the globalization of your efforts and more, cognitive diversity and cultural diversity?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things that's unique about this, about transformative tech is the premise that healing, skilling, and expansion are actually all the same thing, that they belong in the same community. So it seems very broad because it's across those 3 vectors of mental and emotional well-being, social and emotional wellness, and human purpose and performance. But it actually is very narrow in the fact that it's really all about the, human psychology, the hardware and the software, the brain and the mind and the body connected, using, and then leveraging these exponential technologies. So it's the kind of definition that crafts a big tent with a very, precise focus, and allows for a lot of collaboration, because, people who are actively working on depression, they aren't quote unquote competing with someone who's doing human performance, though they, can certainly collaborate and share much of the same information. So by definition, the way that we've set it up is a big tent. And then globally is, I have a global orientation, from having lived in China and, traveled a lot on my own. So, this global orientation, my belief was that, if it's not for all of us, then, it's not like that's not okay, and also the reality, the realistic numbers are, that, even if everybody in, 1 or 2 countries, achieve, whatever the top of the ladder, if the rest of the world, and especially some of the places with the really big numbers like India, Africa, and China, if the rest of the world also isn't experiencing a high level of well-being, then it doesn't actually matter. the outcomes don't really shift globally. And so it is by definition, it's a problem that demands a global orientation. It's a definition that is suitable for a global orientation. And from a humanities standpoint, it is something that is sort of a universal, I believe, right.
I think another interesting point here is that the pandemic and the collaboration, Jane, that you speak of has created a clear global well-being crisis, right? We are clearly aware of the mental health issues. We're also aware of when you push us to really use our virtual technologies, our Zoom and stuff like that, we see a fraying, and we become fascinated with how we can change those technologies to drive flourishing. When you and I first started talking about your conference maybe 2 years ago, I kept trying to figure out, like, what category does this fit in? And, like, what is it? Where is it, right? Well, if there was any question about where technology, flourishing, mental health, learning capacity fit, this pandemic moment has helped frame that. And I think we saw a lot of that. We saw a lot of that today.
Well, I want to, so now I get to ask you and Mickey questions.
Yeah.
So, usually, so when you guys have come to my conference before, you haven't really had a chance to sort of like really see the whole thing. This is kind of one of the fun things about, this at a distance kind of world is like you actually got to see, so much. And so, as, given the way that you both synthesize so much, I'm really curious, what did you see today?
I am just going to interject here and say, I can't wait to continue following this conversation, but I'm going to let you guys continue from here.
Okay.
So lovely to see all of
Jane.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Well, I would say, Nichol, I'm going to point out that today I haven't actually been able to be completely tuned in. I was tuning in and then jumping off and tuning in and then jumping off. Friday was it's a tough work day for me. But the Gallup one I thought was pretty fascinating. And the other person that was teamed up with Gallup that was talking about these new metrics and this notion that I didn't even have any idea that Daniel Kahneman had been involved, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel-winning behavioral scientist. I didn't realize he was involved in the original shaping of this global survey, a global collection of surveys that were done over a number of years. And I just loved the nuance of saying, okay, yes, we didn't have anything like Gallup in certain countries. Now we do. Now we actually have to be culturally sensitive. I thought that was important. The other thing that I really appreciated was Jane just left, but Jane and Poppy Crum were talking about how much we are being affected by this weird moment, and whether we know it or not, and how much our children are being affected, our kids are being affected by this. So I love that session because it started getting into kind of the neuroplasticity and the neuroscience of some of this stuff, because of Poppy's background, but just that exploration of turn off the video, maybe just listen, try out different platforms like the alternative VR platforms or other platforms, just to get a sense of the different ways. Alt space VR, I think, is what Poppy mentioned. And also understand how much our brains and maybe our 5-year-old kids are being shaped by this in maybe positive ways as well. They're figuring out things sooner than some of the teachers are. So to me, that was really inspiring, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow because I get to take a break and actually just tune in on it all day and not feel that, there's a weird pressure when you're actually presenting or hosting, and I don't have any of that pressure this year, which I'm pretty happy about. So I'm just excited to visit.
Mick, at the end of the conversation between Jane and Poppy, Poppy made a very interesting comment about almost the speed at which we're evolving using these technologies, and almost the hopefulness that young people are using to figure them out, almost like they're the lighthouse from which we can learn. So as I was watching today, I made a couple of clips. So let's see if we can take a look at that right now. Omid, and let's see if this works.
I mean, from a neuroplasticity perspective, we are going to be different humans when we come out of this. I think that's no question, whether it's us, whether it's, I have a 5-year-old, I listen to their Zoom calls, and it's often the adults that have difficulty. Adult is stressed, adult drops off, the teacher in some cases. And it's a bunch of 5-year-olds who are our next leaders going, okay, we've lost them. What do we need to do? Can we help him? Can we bring him back? Well, I think, that screen's frozen. Let's try, and they're busy doing this. And as, that might seem scary to some people, like, oh no, screens. But these minds are engaged in amazing ways and dealing with the situation. And we are different humans every time we engage with new technology. As long as we approach it from, this is what's happening. We are empowered, and we are thinking through the things that we're going to want to recover, and also the things that have happened because of this type of virtual and digital environment that we're living in with regard to it's an opportunity.
Yeah, that just struck me as an interesting place to turn and to learn, and also Papa was bringing up some of the downsides of all of this, but then the positive side is there's a new generation that is teaching us this stuff.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the text that you sent to me where you were like, it's simultaneously, it might be the most optimistic. Can you talk about that? Because I think in this spirit of the times, it's really relevant.
Yeah, this is, well, that's right. We are, look, we're in a global crisis, and we have many global crises, right? So we've got the election thing, we've got the virus coming back, and at a time when people really just don't want to deal with that, plus whatever all the economic issues are going into that. And yet, here is a community that is doggedly forging and taking new territory, inventing the future, figuring out how we might program ourselves better, how we might design the future we want to invent. And it's something between jarring but kind of a statement of where we're at, that we have this power, we have these problems going on, and in a broader sense, and Mick, you brought this up on our show a moment ago, this is a design moment. These are intentional decisions we can make about how we design ourselves and design our future. And the other thing I'm struck by is, the national conversation has been somewhat of a downer. We've all been hurling stuff at each other. And just under the surface is this amazing work that is, so powerful. How do we program cities to become more flourishing? How is it that our vehicles can take care of us? All the conversations that we're having here, but we use the technology correctly, are very hopeful, right? And so, part of this is, how do we spread that and enroll more people in it? And, you were even talking today about the fact that our most pervasive technologies, like gaming technology that we often don't even think of as media, can be very powerful for this. So we're almost at we're at a moment where what you've been shepherding for 6 years has to break into the mainstream, because it's kind of what's next.